Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on sociology of kinship, in today's lecture we are going to discuss Gary Becker's work, A Treatise on Family. In this particular book, Gary Becker is trying to compare traditional families with modern families, and he is of opinion that due to economic factor, family as an institution has undergone transformation. He basically tries to understand how the family has evolved through the period and how the family as an institution has undergone large-scale change. So we have discussed in the first half of the lecture traditional society. Now we are going to discuss families in modern society. So in modern society and market facility, trade and production and dynamic economic environment rapidly change technologies, income and opportunity. So modernity is kind of identified with the coming in of technology and rational ways of doing economic action. So the knowledge which was accumulated in the traditional society from older generation is no longer valid. It becomes kind of useless because the economic environment has changed. So you need not learn what was existing in the older society. What is required is learning skills and trade which is kind of contemporary. So small schools that prepared members for a traditional activity are not efficient as large school with members from multiple families that teach general knowledge adaptable to new environment. So we know that modern society is also a society marked by professionalism, whereas the traditional society was more in terms of family skills. Now every family cannot be doing the same kind of skills. What is required is to learn new technology, new skills in which the members of the families are not from the same kin and blood background. It's a kind of a heterogeneous family where everyone is learning modern technique based on science and technology. The third thing he talks about is the traditional society, family insurance worked. Members of the kin family would give gift or loans to members at time of distress, but this becomes kind of little useless or redundant because of the requirement has increased in terms of economic numbers. So individual can self-insure. So from the family insurance, there's a shift to self-insurance. And how do they insure? By borrowing from the capital market in bad terms, or by saving in good times. So the individual is not dependent on family and kin. Why? Because the demand may be very high and family kin members need not necessarily able to fulfill the demand. Market insurance becomes more effective and reliable than family insurance, especially in times of distress faced by a number of families. So if there is a depression or the market goes down, all members of the family or the kin network would be having an economic crisis. Then the formal insurance will not work. Your families have to take help of the bank and the capital market to take self-insurance. Kinship ties becomes less important in modern society because modern insurance is used instead of kin insurance. Market school is used instead of family school, and examination becomes significant instead of kin certification. So there is a decline of the importance of kin, and this is kind of also reducing the functional role of kin. Members do not monitor and control other members. There are several reasons why members of the family cannot control, because many a time they are scattered. Sometimes they do not have the time to be vigilant about what other members are doing. So in a modern contemporary society, monitoring and regulation of the other members' behavior declines. Kinship is less important. The ancestors receive less respect and attention. So the respect and high esteem to the older generation and to the ancestor reduces. They are kind of not necessarily objected to the criticism by other. Many a time the younger generation would put the blame of the economic crisis or their bad time on the ancestors and older. So the older generation and the ancestors are subject to criticism. The reduced importance of the family implies that the middle class and the upper class family gain the freedom and privacy of action, which was earlier in traditional society available only to the poor families. So there is a kind of uniformity in terms of increase in freedom and privacy. Rather, everyone wants the enjoyment of privacy. The control of the parents on the choice of the spouse of their children reduces. Individuals are now wanting to make their own choices. So there is an individual choice in marriage, and they have the right to reject the spouse selected by the parents or to choose the spouse without opposition of the family and kin member. And for this, we see the market has come in. We have dating apps, and we have the market kind of giving this possibility of individual choosing the spouse according to their requirement. So every newspaper advertisements, and there are certain particular website for based on caste and community, that is matrimonial sites, that enables individual to select their choice on their own individual's likes and dislikes. So the preference for the spouse is based on individual like and dislike and not the family compatibility. So in traditional society, marriages were arranged keeping in mind the compatibility of two kin groups. Now it is more in terms of the liking of individual. So the status, prestige and family reputation of the family are less important, and factors like love, personal choice and personal kind of arrangements becomes more important. So the occurrence of divorce therefore increases. Why? Because it is the individual, two individual take a decision to enter into a relation, and after some time they find that they are incompatible. Their likes and dislikes are not matching. As a result, the marriages comes to an end. So in traditional society, the divorce was kind of restricted in order to ensure that the family continued to gain benefit. Whereas the rate of divorce in modern society has increased. Why? Because individual wants to take another second chance or maybe another third chance to ensure that they enter into a compatible relation with someone. So modern societies have paradoxical combination of love, marriage, yet high rate of divorce. So Gary Becker is looking into this social factor phenomena from an economic perspective. He also tries to talk about the shift from quantity of children to quality of children, and that he is trying to argue that in modern society, people prefer to have less children. Why? Because the investment on the upbringing of children has increased, and parents want to ensure that they are able to do high rate of investment on their children. Therefore, the number of children would kind of decline and the quality of the children would increase. Upbringing of the children is taken as the sole responsibility of parents. So in traditional society, the child belonged to the group, to the family. Everybody would contribute to the economic, medical and other requirement of the children. Now in modern society, it is only the parents who is kind of investing. And Gary Becker would argue that the parents are investing on the child so that their economic status improves when the child grows up and are able to take care of the parents. So in modern societies, nuclear families are more affectionate and closer than in the traditional society where kin and distant relatives were part of the close network. In modern society, the conjugal relationship is stronger because of the individual choice and selection of mate, and so is the relationship between parent and children, as it is the sole responsibility of parents to upbring the child, and also because the emphasis is on quality rather than quantity. In traditional society, kin relations were closer because the prevalence of family insurance, training and certification by family. So what we actually see when we try to understand Gary Becker's theory of evolution of family is the shift from familialism, that is importance, role of family and kinship, to individualism. And this familism to individualism has been because of the change taking place in the market, because the society is now a market-oriented society. The production which was taking place in the family has shifted to the market, and therefore the nature of family shifts, or the role of the family kind of shifts towards giving more emphasis to individual ideas. Gary Becker stresses the issues such as high divorce rate, labor participation of women, low fertility, illegitimacy and female-headed households would be offset in a case of slowdown in the expansion of the welfare state, and with that a slower increase in divorce, illegitimacy and labor participation by married women. So what he is actually arguing is that as the market is becoming more dominant and the role of state has shifted from welfare to a neoliberal state, there would be a change, and the change would be marked by a high labor force participation of women. When women move out and start earning, their dependence on the men become less. This would kind of also lead to women taking decision about their marriage life, and therefore there could be a increase in divorce rate and also taking decision on the number of children that they would have, so it lowers down the fertility. He is kind of giving a gendered understanding of the transformation taking place in the family. When he looks into his work on modern society, he talks about the last half of the 20th century, because he is of opinion that Second World War was the time when it led to a large-scale upheaval in the institution of family. From 1950 to 1973, the legitimate birth rate declined by 1/3. Divorce rate more than doubled. Labor force participation of married women with young children more than tripled, and the percentage of women-headed household dependent children also tripled. So he was kind of looking into society, families in basically in the Western society with larger focus on the United States, but we will see how towards the end he kind of says that if there are evidence to suggest the change in United States, it could be found in other countries as well. So family in the United States changed more rapidly than during in this period than it did in the any earlier period. Now, what are the causes of the change? That is, why is there an increase in the labor participation of women, or the earning of women has increased specifically in the American economy? And here he says that one of the reasons why it has kind of increased is because of the dominance of technology, which has entered in terms of selection of choice of children, number of children that one could have, the importance of the women's movement, the role of the welfare state, but most dominant is the importance of a market economy. So it raises the relative cost of the children and thereby reduces the demand for children, as later requires more times of the mother. Studies suggest that with increase in earning of women, there is a considerable decline in the fertility rate. So the gain from marriage is reduced by the rise in the earning of women and increased participation in the labor force. Due to fall in fertility, the sexual division of women becomes less advantageous to the men, and for women it becomes kind of less dependency, and therefore the choice to be in marriage or to kind of come out becomes more easier for them. Divorce becomes more attractive when the gain from marriage is reduced. So, as I already said, that he is looking at the institution of marriage from gain and loss, and the gain and loss is based on the sexual division of labor, like one spouse doing and here most of the time women doing the domestic work is a gain for men because it kind of saves on. So, if whatever the women is doing in the domestic sphere, if it is outsourced to the market, then the spouse has to spend an amount. So, that is the economic equation that Gary Becker is looking in when he is understanding marriage from gain and loss perspective. Another scholar, Mitchell, studied the interaction between fertility rate, divorce and labor force participation since 1980s and suggests that increase in the labor force participation rate of married women is directly proportionate to the divorce rate. That is, when market comes in and there are more job opportunities for women, they move out from the domestic sphere, the earning increases, the dependency will decline, the gain from marriage will decline. Therefore, marriage is not the only option for women, and they kind of ensures that they are kind of more independent in taking their decision. So, economic development of the United States and the resulting growth in the earning power of women has not accelerated since 1950. Yet, both the divorce rate and labor participation is increased in the last 20 years. There has been the highest rate of decline in the fertility rate in the period between 1956 and 1976. Eventually, the female earning continues to increase and fertility rate continues to decline. However, the time spent for childcare is considerably reduced. The highest time spent on children is before the birth of the first child and after the birth of the last child. So, most of the women would enter the labor market only when they are kind of not obliged for the responsibility of child care. Another important issue that he talks about, which affects the nature of the family in modern society, is the contraceptive revolution. Now, the contraceptive revolution was a kind of a dependence on medicines and pills to control the number of children born into a family. So, the typical family has changed due to the influence of contraceptive revolution that ushered in the introduction of pills. So, in the 1950s, pills enabled women to get rid of the unwanted child and therefore also increase the divorce rate, because many of the reason that in traditional society it was the children that could bind the sexual relation or the marital relation between two individuals. Now, with the kind of technology coming in to get rid of the child, it could be a cause of quarrel or conflict between spouse, leading to high divorce rate. Although the contraceptive revolution provided better control over the timing and number of children, it could not explain the high rate of decline of fertility rate in United States since 1950s. Another factor that influenced the transformation of family is the women's movement. The women movement, especially in the West, encouraged to reduce the childbearing, increase labor force participation, and assert their independence by divorcing their husband and becoming head of their own household. The women's movement provided emotional support, and various arguments and evidence are there to suggest that some women would take these steps. So, it was not kind of having a large scale change among the women, but it did lead to a number of women accepting the ideals set across by the movement. The women's movement was primarily a response to other forces that have dramatically changed the role of women rather than a major independent force in changing their role. The next is the welfare state. Now, the growth of the welfare state has been a powerful force that has changed the family in recent decades. Expenditure on social security, unemployment compensation, Medicare, medical aid, aid to mothers with dependent children, food stamp and other transfer programs grew in real terms. So the state becomes the custodians of taking care of the health, education and other needs. In that case, when the state becomes relevant, the family as an institution becomes less important because the dependency on state to provide the services increases, especially when comes to the women. So the aid to women with dependent children and other kind of welfare grew rapidly during the earlier period, whereas medical care and social security flourished during the later period. This is talking about 1950s and 1970s. The welfare state is poor women's alimony, which substitutes for husband's earning. The expansion of welfare, along with the general decline in the gain from marriage, explains the sizable growth in the ratio of illegitimate to legitimate birth rates despite the introduction of pill and other effective contraceptive. The growth of public programs like the growth in 19th century of private market life insurance has weakened the ties of family by further eroding the traditional role of family in protecting members against hazards. So both the state and the market has come out as dominant. So the reliability on the family for providing insurance, for providing training, for providing certification has been taken over by the state and the market, and therefore family as an institution based on collective feeling has declined. The public programs like transfer of resources between generations, for example, social security transfer from workers to retired person and free school transfer from adults to children. Since parents reduce their own expenditure on the education because the state has come in to take care of the education, the parents reduce the expenses and there is a reduction in the human capital of children to recoup some of the resources for themselves that are taxed away to provide public education for children. Public support may have a small net effect on the total investment in children. So what basically Gary Becker is saying is that when education is provided by the state, the parents reduces the expenditure on the state, but the expenditure on other will increase. Why? The public funded education is dependent on the tax collected from individuals. So there is a kind of taking from one side but cutting the other resources. Next he talks about is the weakening of the tie between the parent and children, and this is kind of public support and parental responses, however, weaken the ties between parent and children and are partly responsible for growing conflict between generation in recent decades. Now, the younger generation is not dependent on the parents and therefore they can take recourse from market and state. There is a lot of generational difference between the parents and the children, and the bond becomes kind of weak. When he's talking about this whole idea of parent-child relationship, he talks about social security payments financed by taxes on the working population reduce the amount spent by children to support retired parents because children recoup for themselves some of the resources taxed away. Parents are likely to heed or otherwise consider the interest of children who contribute less to the support. The earning power of women increased and the welfare state greatly expanded in the Western countries. So Becker argues that if his interpretation of change in the United States during this period is valid, the family should have changed dramatically in other countries as well. So is the change universal? And according to Gary Becker, data suggest that since 1964, fertility has declined by 30% in France, England, Wales and Sweden. The divorce rate has more than doubled in these countries. So the momentum of the rapid change that began in the 1950s led fertility to keep declining, divorce to keep increasing, and marriage to continue decreasing even after the economic downturn of the 1970s. So when we look into the 21st century and beyond, we are kind of trying to understand that if an economic depressions were to continue and the welfare state were to contract, this might lead to another change in these new forms of family structure and maybe a reversal towards past model of larger and more protective families. So the question could be that would it lead to such kind of a possibility in the near future? And that tells us to understand the validity of an economic process, economic approach to long-term evolution of the family and its recent change. There is a rational choice model of cost-benefit analysis in explaining organization of family in fashion that satisfied needs. So we need to kind of understand the validity of the economic approach in understanding the transformation that's taking place. And what kind comes to mind is that social transformation has to be understood in an embedded manner. What's taking place in the economy impacts the family, and in the other it impacts gender relations and wider social transformation. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.